Morgan Sheets. I'm a physical therapist. I currently work at the Seattle VA in the Spinal Cord Injury unit. And we also have Heather Martin here. She is a PT by degree, but she works as a care manager at Harborview, and she'll be helping with questions at the end. Today we're going to be talking about specifically beds and considerations when living with a spinal cord injury. One question I am posing is a hospital bed always the solution? And the alternative we'll be talking about are commercial or retail options. I have no conflicts of interest to disclose, nor do I represent any of the products I'll be presenting on today. I'm here as a volunteer. Specifically, the learning objectives that we're going to be reviewing today, we'll be talking about current research and understanding the barriers and need for further research to be done. We'll also talking about bed frame terminology and mattresses and overlay classifications and how you know or how you will decide which bed frames, mattresses, or overlays are going to be appropriate for you or your patient. We're going to be talking about extra accessories or add-ons to improve independence and safety. We'll be discussing the ideal bed and what factors might be stopping one from acquiring it and how to overcome these factors if possible. We'll also be talking about actions to take before purchasing a bed and also additional strategies to implement to maintain your skin health, because that's very important, in addition to having the appropriate bed. So as every good clinician should, I started looking into the research when I was creating this presentation to see what was out there comparing hospital beds and commercial beds. Some of the general findings I came across is there's actually not that much research among the spinal cord injury population when trying to ask yourself which bed might be better. But there is research that shows there's benefits of specific pressure relieving surfaces, so maybe specific mattresses, but there's no consensus on what is optimal. And then another theme I came across is that a lot of health professionals were just considering someone's function or their skin health, and they weren't looking at the whole individual and potentially if they wanted to have a significant other in the bed with them, being able to have enough space for that, or also what it's going to do to one's psychological status if you introduce a hospital bed into the home. And just that as clinicians we need to make sure we are considering all of these aspects because it'll make an impact on one's life. I found a specific case series that I wanted to go in depth about. It specifically looked at a hospital bed alternative at home instead of using a hospital bed at home once 4 individuals were discharged. This study was done out of Kessler Institute of Rehab in New Jersey, and it was published just last year. The purpose, again, was to try to help inform clinicians about why individuals might choose a commercial bed option instead of a hospital bed at home. They specifically looked at the Assured Comfort bed, so that is a commercial bed option, and they compared it to the standard of care hospital bed with a mattress overlay. The specific mattress overlay that they used was the Drive Premium Guard Gel. And I have a picture of that overlay to the left of the screen. And then the specific bed that they chose, I just wanted to emphasize this is what they used in the study. There are lots of options out there when you look at commercial beds, but they chose this one specifically based off of recommendations of what some of their previous patients had recommended. This bed, it's fully electric, so that means the entire bed goes up and down. The head of the bed and the foot of the bed goes up and down electronically and not manually. The mattress that this company advertises is a medium to firm density foam with firmness at the perimeter to help transfers become easier. They also advertise that you can use a personal mattress as long as it will accommodate to the electric features of their bed. It's available in many sizes, and this is really important because hospital beds usually only come in a twin size. But this commercial bed is offered in twin, full, queen, and split king. The split king option is you can move it separately compared to your partner. So if you need to tilt the head of the bed up to do a self-catheterization or you're sitting up for more comfort, then you can do it without disturbing your partner. There's also a variety of headboard, footboard, and finish options, which when I talk about the results of the study, that was really important because aesthetically it helped people feel more comfortable with this bed in their home. And this picture just shows an example of their metal frame options. And then there were optional side rails, which some of the individuals in the study preferred. The way they collected their information was they did a questionnaire asking why their individuals chose the alternative system bed compared to the hospital bed. There was a semi-structured interview about the patient's skin health and the experience they had with this alternative bed compared to the hospital bed. And they also did pressure mapping to try to get some objective data to see if the commercial bed actually did a nice job relieving pressure like a hospital bed might. When they did the pressure mapping, they specifically looked at our ischial tuberosities, so those are our sit bones, and our sacrum, which is near our tailbone. And they also looked at the greater trochanter when you're in side lying, which are your hip bones out here. The 4 individuals that were in this study, they were all younger males that had recently discharged from this hospital. They were all motor complete injuries, meaning they were Asia A or B, so they had no motor or muscle movement below their injury level. And they also were all relatively high cervical injuries. All of them were C6, only one of them had their injury at C4. And it also might be hard to read, but caregiver hours, 2 of them did not have any caregivers, and 2 of them did have some caregiver hours. And this study also interviewed one of the partners of the individual with a spinal cord injury. Functionally, I thought it was important to look at, they looked at transfers from the bed to the wheelchair, they looked at rolling, they looked at supine to short sit at the edge of the bed, and they also looked at dressing. The majority of these individuals did not need a lot. Some of them needed a little bit of help or no help with these tasks. 2 of them needed a lot of help with the supine, so laying flat to short sit, or dressing. And I also wanted to point out in this study, they also looked at other habits that these individuals do other than just having an ideal bed for them. They all perform weight shifts in bed regularly, so with these 4 individuals, it either meant they turned at night or they sat up to do their self-catheterization. They all did weight shifts in their wheelchairs, which I know as therapists we all recommend individuals do, whether you're in your power chair and you're tilting or you're sitting in your manual chair and you're leaning forward. They all perform skin checks regularly to make sure there's no skin breakdown, and 2 out of the 4 said they moisturized their skin. So this study found they all had a positive experience using the commercial bed. Some reported they even had improved quality of sleep. The reasons they chose this alternative adjustable bed, they felt a greater sense of normalcy because they could their home didn't feel like a hospital. And they also felt like if they had a hospital bed, it would have a negative psychological impact on intimacy. They also liked that accessories could be removed to make it resemble a regular bed. They also appreciated they had the option of a larger size, as most of them wanted to be able to sleep with a partner in the bed. And they also felt like the larger size helped them roll better and get dressed better. Another reason was it was recommended by their therapist. And in regard to skin and pressure mapping, there were no episodes of bed-related skin breakdown, and they all had clinically acceptable pressure mapping patterns. The way, for clinicians that are listening, the way they determined this was that the pressure map showed no areas of red or orange peaks. And they actually found some of the pressure mapping on the commercial bed was better than the hospital bed. So this all goes to say that there's nothing wrong with commercial beds, the adjustable bed systems that are out there, and they might be appropriate for individuals with spinal cord injury instead of always deciding on a hospital bed. So from my look in the research, I was able to conclude that there are no beds that are exclusively for spinal cord injury or for individuals with spinal cord injury. I chose this picture because it might make our lives easier if we could say oh yeah, you have a spinal cord injury, here's the bed for you. But as we know, everyone with a spinal cord injury looks different and you have different needs. So as a clinician, I'm looking at more of your function, your skin, also your other aspects, like if you're hoping to sleep with a partner or you just want a bigger bed, instead of just going to a specific company and saying this is the perfect one for you. So now we're going to look at how you would decide which type of bed might be appropriate for you, which type of mattress might be appropriate for you. So medically, I've been referring to beds as general, the whole picture, but when you're ordering beds, the bed refers to the frame. So that's the wooden frame that is beneath the mattress. There are several different options. I put 3 stars next to the first picture and I said no special features. So the 3 stars are there because in an ideal world, this would be the perfect bed. They're not going to be as expensive because you don't need power features. You're going to be able to travel easier because hotels, unfortunately, don't usually have the power features. So it's just going to open your world to where you can go. In order to have this bed, though, you have to be able to perform unlevel transfers, or maybe you're using a sling or a Hoyer system that could transfer you onto the bed because it may not match the level of your wheelchair. And then you're also not going to need the head of the bed elevation because this bed does not have that option. Say you can do unlevel transfers, you don't need the bed to match your wheelchair height, but you do need the head of the bed to go up and down. Then at a minimum, you'll need a semi-electric bed or potentially a manual bed where you can crank it up and down. With the semi-electric bed, the head of the bed's going to go up, and then there is usually a crank manual feature that can let the bed go up and down, so you could get away with this bed and still do level transfers, but you'll probably have to have a caregiver manage the crank because once you're in the bed, I don't think you'd be able to reach it to then do the transfer. Say you do need that bed to go up and down, you have caregivers that help you, and you don't want them having to bend over to reach your low level. So you want that bed to go up and down. You'll need the fully electric option. We'll talk about in the next slide kind of insurance and self-pay considerations, but fully electric would be for you. And this would also allow you to easily and independently achieve level surface transfers because you could get the manual wheelchair to adjust to the height of the bed. And then I stuck manual on here as well. This just means that there's a crank instead of the power feature. It's going to be cheaper just because you're not having to depend on power, and if your power goes out, it would be great to have this option too. So we always have to consider how you're going to acquire this bed frame because financials are a very real consideration in our world. If you are looking to go through insurance, for private insurance, most are going to pay for that semi-electric bed. Sometimes if you want the fully electric and you ask, they might authorize it, or they might make you pay an upcharge to acquire this bed. But unfortunately, if you have Medicaid or some of our public or government-funded insurances, then they're only going to pay for the semi-electric option. So if you really want the fully electric, you're likely going to have to go through self-pay. Aesthetically, if that's something that's really important to you and you don't like the look of a hospital bed, granted the hospital beds that do go home with patients are less bulky than the ones in the hospital, but if that still is something you don't like, then you're going to want to go the commercial route. There's usually a lot more options for headboards like I discussed in that earlier slide. If size is really important to you and you know you want a bigger bed size, you would likely go the self-pay route. Most insurances are only going to pay for twin sizes, unfortunately, unless you're bariatric, and then you would need that bigger size that they would pay for. I always recommend when you're considering which options you want to go with, speak with a therapist or your case manager to try to figure out what your options are. So now we're going to talk about support surfaces, or they're also called specialty surfaces if they're through insurance. And these are the mattresses and the overlays. As I'm sure you all know, a mattress is in this picture. It's what you're sleeping on. An overlay is not in this picture, but those are those thin surfaces that sometimes people can get by with. So we'll be talking about both of those. They're made out of many materials such as memory foam, gel, regular foam, feather, pillow, inner spring mattresses, you name it, they likely exist. So different types, again, I put my 3 stars here because I wanted to emphasize the ideal goal is to be able to tolerate a regular mattress. Now I know based off of one's level of spinal cord injury or how their skin is, they may not be able to tolerate this. But if you can tolerate this, then it's going to really open your doors to travel again because hotels aren't going to have the special mattresses. So that's why it is good to work towards this goal. But say you do have some skin pressure injuries or some, traditionally known as decubitus ulcers, then you might have to go through insurance. Insurance or Medicare specifically groups mattresses into 3 different groups. The first group is the pressure reduction mattresses, and these include power or non-powered overlay. So that's the picture I have here. They also include non-powered mattresses. So if you're in a group 1 criteria, that means you don't have many skin issues, but you're probably at very high risk. So insurance is likely to qualify to get you one of these surfaces. Group 2 is considered pressure relief. To qualify for this group, you're likely having some wounds and you're working with a wound care nurse to qualify. These are your powered mattresses, so they include low air loss or rotating surfaces. With rotating surfaces, a lot of times it's advertised that your caregivers won't have to turn you as much because the bed will do it for you. I just want you to be careful when you're considering this option because sometimes the rotating that occurs can cause shearing. So your skin's going to rub and it can increase your risk of pressure injuries or the ulcers. And then this group is not great for transfers or performing ADLs because a lot of them have air involved and you can't achieve a really stable surface to transfer off of or to get dressed. Group 3 is fluid, and I know the theme of this summit is home. You likely will not have this type of bed in your home just because they're very heavy, they're very expensive. At the VA, we specifically use these for individuals that have like stage 3 or stage 4 wounds. Maybe they just had a flap procedure done and they don't go home with this bed. I did put a water bed here, not because insurance classifies a water bed as a group 3, but as water is a fluid, I wanted to talk about water beds. Interestingly, some of our veterans and anyone with spinal cord injury might use a water bed to relieve pressure. It does a great job at relieving pressure, but what it doesn't do a great job of is creating a stable surface for you to transfer from, for you to get dressed on. But if you are having a lot of skin issues and the really special beds that you might use in the hospital are not something you can have in your house, a water bed might be an option. So how do you decide what mattress you're going to need? I've talked about this a little bit, but skin is usually the deciding factor of what mattress you're going to need. You're going to want to ask yourself how often you have to turn, and do you have any current pressure injuries, because that's going to determine if you qualify for those insurance group 1 to 3 beds, or if you can just tolerate a commercial bed. You're going to want to ask yourself your function. Do you need a firm surface for ADLs or transfers? A lot of the commercial beds are firmer than those group 2 and 3 beds. You're also going to want to ask yourself if you want a full-size mattress, because unfortunately, like I was discussing, insurance will only pay for the twin size. You're also going to want to ask yourself about your quality of life, if you're sleeping alone and you need that bigger mattress, and if travel is important to you. So when considering financially how you're going to acquire your mattress, if you go the insurance route, you'll likely have limited options. Most insurances do not pay for retail or commercial beds, so you'll have to go self-pay, although there are some companies that do still try to submit to insurance, so reach out to the company to see if they can help you with paperwork. If you're going the insurance route, there's usually a lot of, especially with COVID this day and age, a lot of supply chain issues, or the vendors that they work with don't offer a lot of options. So if you want a lot of options, you'll probably have to consider the self-pay. Like I've said a few times, with size, insurance is only going to pay for twin size. So speak with your wound care nurse, your therapist, case manager to figure out what your options are. I wanted to include accessories and add-ons in this presentation. Say you can use a regular bed, you don't need any power features, you don't need a special mattress, but you do need something a little extra to help you get by. This could include side rails. A lot of DME companies sell side rails or bed rails. Potentially you're using an overlay on a mattress, but you're worried it's going to slip. You can include like a shelf liner, or the liner that you put under rugs to get some grip so that your overlay does not fall off the bed. And I put a picture here of the material I'm talking about. And then say you can't afford a fully electric bed, but your bed's really low to the ground, you need it higher for your level transfers. You could consider putting your bed on bed raisers. Just be careful with that though, because you're going to want to make sure you're not so high that your feet aren't touching the floor when you transfer. And with the side rails, I also wanted to discuss keep working on your rolling skills, because if you're using the side rail to pull yourself all the way over, it's not recommended because it's really hard on your shoulders. But if you just need it for a little bit of extra balance help, a little bit of assistance, then they're a great option. So the next question is, we've talked about all of the beds, all the options out there. You might know what's ideal for you, but there might be something stopping you from getting this bed. And those three options we're going to talk about are maybe your skin tolerance isn't good enough, your function is not good enough, or financially it's too difficult to get your ideal bed. So skin tolerance is a big reason why individuals can't tolerate a regular mattress. And one of the reasons for this, insurance is the barrier. They're trying to basically kick our patients out as soon as they get to the hospital. And to build skin tolerance, it takes a lot of time. Some solutions I would recommend to overcome this barrier, and something that I do with a lot of my patients, is if I know their skin's looking pretty good and they have a goal to sleep on a regular mattress when they get home, I'll try to switch them to a non-powered regular mattress in the hospital as soon as I can, so their skin gets used to tolerating the regular mattress. And then you can also work on this at home, and we will discuss now how to do this. So usually it's recommended to start, you lay in a position every 2 hours and you have to roll every 2 hours. It's probably something you guys have heard. So once you're in this position for 2 hours, you're going to do a skin check immediately after changing that position, and then another skin check after 15 minutes in that position. If your skin looks good, no redness, no areas of concern, then the next time you're in that position, you're going to add 15 to 30 minutes. You'll continue this process until you reach the goal of tolerating sleeping on any mattress while with little to no turning at night. Say you did your skin check after 15 minutes and you're noticing there's some redness. If you're going the less conservative route, if it's fading in less than 15 minutes, then you're good to go. You can add the 15 to 30 minutes the next time you're in that position. But if it's not faded, it takes longer than the 15 minutes, you're going to stay at that same time. If you're going the less conservative route, if it's fading in half the time you were in that position, so say you're tolerating 4 hours now, and you want to, if it fades in less than 2 hours, you can keep going with that skin tolerance. This is also important to consider. Say you just came out of the hospital, you were on those air mattresses in the hospital, then you're going to want to redo this if you're on a regular mattress at home, because the surfaces are different, so you need to be careful of that. And then this also includes, I know a lot of people put pillows between their knees when they're in a certain position. You also want to try to work away from those, just basically to enable you to require as little caregiver assistance at night as possible. So say your skin looks okay, but function is stopping you from getting your perfect bed. That's why you need a fully electric bed. Again, it's a barrier because insurance is pushing to get you out. The solution I offer is pretty simple. Continue working on your skills, meeting your potential in the outpatient setting. While you're working on these skills, maybe you can just take the hospital bed that insurance has offered to you, and then see once you've reached your potential, once you're at your house, you can maybe afford that simpler bed. And then lastly, maybe it's finances that are stopping you from getting your perfect commercial bed that's going to help you with travel. you have so many medical bills as an individual living with a spinal cord injury that your bed is kind of a lower priority on that list. I'd recommend, again, using what insurance might cover at discharge. Keep working on your skills, working on your skin tolerance, so then you've met your potential, and hopefully in the long run you'd be able to afford a cheaper bed. And then if ultimately you need the more expensive features, then I would just recommend you could consider fundraising, asking your private insurance what they might help cover. So now we're going to talk about just a few bottom line summarizing points. Whatever you decide to do when you're going to get your bed, I want you first to rent or trial what you're thinking about getting. We spend nearly a third of our lives in our bed. That's only if you're sleeping 6 to 8 hours a night. When you're living with a spinal cord injury, that time usually increases a lot. So you want to make sure you're investing in something that's going to work. Most retailers, if you're going the commercial bed route, they offer a trial period. So you can try it out, make sure it's going to work for you before you buy the bed. And then if you're going through insurance, consider renting it. A lot of them are rent to own anyway, so you're going to have to rent it. But I recommend doing it before you buy anything. So this is my last informational slide. As a therapist, one of my favorites. Just because you have a fancy bed or mattress, you have your ideal option, it's not going to replace the following pictures I'm going to talk about when you have a spinal cord injury. So the first one is turning. Just because you have a fancy mattress, that does not mean if you can't tolerate going a whole night without turning, you still need to do your turning. This includes a 30-degree turn, so you're lying flat and then you're just going to turn a little bit instead of all the way on your side because you want to stay off your hip bones. And then the second picture I have here is representing skin checks. Just because you have this fancy bed or mattress does not mean you should stop doing skin checks. As we age, our skin becomes thinner, drier, has decreased blood supply, it's more fragile. So just because you tolerated a special mattress at one time doesn't mean you're going to tolerate the same one 10 years down the road. So you need to make sure you're doing your skin checks. The picture of the individual in the wheelchair is representing you should still be getting to your wheelchair. Your special bed or mattress is not going to encourage you to sit up to watch TV in it all day or to eat dinner in it. Because when you sit up in the bed, no matter what surface you're on, it's not going to be as pressure relieving as your wheelchair cushion. And this position when you're sitting up in the bed puts a lot of pressure on your sacrum and causes a lot of risk for those ulcers I was talking about. Lastly, you want to be prepared. Just because you have a fancy bed or mattress, you still need to be prepared, especially if your bed has power features. You have to have a plan if the power goes out. My recommendation is you're going to try to get out of your bed as soon as you can in case that bed's going to deflate to the springs. You should also potentially have a backup overlay that can help relieve some pressure while you're waiting for power to go back on, or you could have a generator, for example. So that was all my information. I couldn't have done this alone. I want to thank Cindy Arrowwood, who's at the VA, Heather, who's out of Harborview, and Kimmy Rainier, who is out of Rehab Without Walls. As a therapist, I know a lot about positioning, but I don't actually order the beds, so these three were able to help provide some information about insurance and then different options that exist. Here's my reference list. Not super long because there's just not a lot of research out there. So I wanted to bring it back. Is a hospital bed always the solution? I hope you learned today it's not. There's lots of considerations that go into selecting a bed frame and a mattress. So just make sure you consider all those considerations when you're deciding. And I wanted to take the rest of the time we have here to answer any questions that you guys might have, or if you have experiences or recommendations you'd like to offer to the group, please feel free to share those.
Okay. So the question was, in our experience, is there some mattresses or beds that we know that work better, like whether it's sand or air? For us, we work more on the inpatient side. So I think Kimmy, we were hoping she could come, but she's at the Rehab Without Walls booth. It really is dependent on the person. And I think the recommendation from the, the wound care nurses and from Kimmy, who see people on the outside, is you've got to try it. There's not a one size fits all for everyone. So if you're looking for another option, having the 30-day trial or the 60-day trial so that you can build up that tolerance, I think is going to be the best option. I know that I think connecting, that's where we were hoping we want to have some, hopefully some other people with experiences if they've tried things. I know there's a lot of forums, and you can look the spinal cord injury forums online, where a lot of people try a lot of different products. I know that Kimmy, when we were having our discussions, mentioned that a lot of times the Tempur-Pedic ones don't work as well. One, because they get hot, so that's a consideration, but also consider the type of bed frame that you have, because if you're, especially for folks that are using a lift or need a little extra space for their transfers, some of the frames don't allow a Hoyer lift to slide underneath it. So the mattress can be great, but if the bed frame doesn't work for the way that you like to transfer, that might eliminate that option.
And I could also speak to that a little bit. You specifically mentioned sand. So I worked at a few facilities, some that have used the sand beds, some have used more intense air pressure relieving beds, still all in that group 3 category. So you're really only going to use those high-level beds or it's only recommended to use those if you do have wounds already forming, just because if you're trying to do a lot of your functional tasks, then those beds are going to make it really difficult. So I wouldn't go to that extreme unless you need to. Hopefully that helps. A lot of the commercial beds, like some beds I'm sure you've seen commercials for, they do have firmer settings. So maybe at night you could set it to a less firm setting, and then when you're trying to transfer in the morning, you can set it to the firmer option, and then that's still a commercial bed. If you still want a bigger bed or a more aesthetically pleasing bed. Yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
In my experience, no, they will only pay for something that is medically coded, and that is some sort of hospital bed. Just like wheelchairs, just like any sort of medical equipment, they can't bill for it or pay for it unless there's a medical code. So unfortunately not. I mean, I know there's other funding resources. People have settlements or can get some money from other sources. I don't know that crime victims, I think in the past crime victims used to provide some money, but I don't think that's the case now. But yeah, unfortunately insurance does not do that. And that even includes, I've experienced that with L&I as well, that they won't even do that. It has to have a medical code for them to be able to, the claims to be approved. Yeah. Great question.
And I think we've been talking about Kimmy a little bit. She's had years of experience in this. She's an RN. She's at the rehab without walls table. And she said if there were questions you guys wanted more information about that we weren't able to answer, she's happy to answer those. I believe she did say she did have experience one time someone had private insurance where they basically said, this is what we're going to pay. If you want something bigger, like a bariatric bed, and you're not bariatric, you have to pay an upcharge out of pocket for that. I think those experiences are rare, but she works in outpatient, so she might have more knowledge to provide there.
Yeah, I think I've had that experience as well. Sometimes insurance, if you have private insurance, depending on who the vendor is, they'll let you pay an upcharge for something that's different than what they pay for, but that varies by vendor and insurance too. So the question was, in our experience as therapists, do the air mattresses or the sand mattresses, is it harder to do range of motion and exercises?
I was going to say, if you have a caregiver doing it for you, likely not. You might have, the individual is going to move around a little bit more, so the firm mattress is going to be more helpful. But especially if the person is doing it themselves, yes, it would be more difficult just because they're already working so hard to get their balance, and adding in a really mobile surface is just going to make it more difficult. So that's why we always strive for the firmer mattresses, as long as you don't have skin issues and your skin can tolerate it, just as a general factor. But once you start developing those skin problems, that's when your skin overtakes your function, because if you have a really bad skin injury, then those can be life-threatening. So you need to get on a really supportive surface.
I know the air mattresses usually sit on a regular hospital bed frame, so those are easier to access. The sand or the fluidized air, those tend to be a rounder, taller frame, so they are harder to do transfers and everything and have your caregiver assist you. You kind of sink down into them. They're enveloping you. And I think the other issue, too, is you can't, some of them you can't get like a Hoyer lift underneath it, so you would need one of those overhead lifts. Any other questions? Great questions. So the question is, are people still using bed ladders, and are they still, how often, and to help be more independent with moving around and not using bed rails?
I would say like trapezes and those bed ladders where you're using your arms to pull you up, I think is what you're referring to.
Yeah, like they go around the mattress.
Yeah. We, at least from my experience, we tend to stay away from those just because of how hard it is on your shoulders. Especially if you're using a manual chair, you're already pushing your chair so many times a day that your shoulders are likely going to give out in the long term. So we're just trying to reduce the amount of pressure or strain that you're putting on your shoulders. So we don't use those very often.
So I want to make sure I heard everything. So the question is, or the comment was first, that you've been on a low air loss mattress to heal a wound that you had, and it sounds like it's being authorized for a year, probably. And then the question is whether to, after that point, to try to switch to like a regular hospital bed mattress, or that's a great question. I think one, I'll say with the low air loss mattress or any sort of mattress or hospital bed, in my experience, once you rent it for about a year, then you own it, so you can keep it. I don't know. If you want to switch to another mattress, you'll have to have, one of your healthcare professionals try to submit that, either to like a pressure relieving or a mattress with an overlay. You'd have to submit it to your insurance to see if they'll buy another one. They may not. And then I guess to answer your question, I think Morgan did a great job of explaining. A lot of it depends on your skin, if they tolerate it. Your function, are there things that you can't do that you would be able to do if you were on more of a regular mattress? But I would definitely first check in with your care team to see if they think that your skin's ready for that. And just looking at your goals and what, you've obviously had, it sounds like you've had a regular mattress before. Mattress.
Okay.
And did that work better for you before? Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing to consider too is, again, if there's a power outage, the disadvantage of having a low air loss mattress is it'll deflate, and that would put you at risk for skin injury. So, yeah, which you could do. So I think, think about what your goals are, what your lifestyle is, and talking with your care team. But I mean, it does again open other options if your air mattress, the low air loss mattress leaks or gets, breaks. Having a mattress that isn't powered is advantageous.
And I would also ask, if what caused your wound. If it was the bed, then maybe you don't want to go back to it, or you want to change some of the habits you were using. But if it was your wheelchair or something and it wasn't the bed, then potentially depending on how well your skin has healed, I would recommend consulting with your healthcare providers. But if it wasn't the bed, then there's no reason to say why you couldn't go back. If you did, though, you want to make sure you start out at like that 2 to 3 hours, however long you can tolerate, and work through that process. You don't want to just, however often you roll right now on your low air loss, you don't just want to do that on a regular bed because the mattress surface is completely different. So, good advice.
Yeah, that's very true. So
Maybe repeat the comment.
yeah, so it's just a comment of, with wheelchairs or equipment that, there's often going to be a no, but keep asking and submitting to the insurance because often then there can be a yes. And I think that's great advice. That is true. Just because it was a no one time, I've even often found when I've been in my role for about 3 years and I didn't used to order hospital beds, but I do now. And there's certain things that when I was oriented to it that they're like, well, the insurance doesn't pay for this. And then I just started asking, and every once in a while, we'll get it. So I think it's great to always ask questions of your healthcare providers. And even if they think it's a no, you can ask them, could it be a yes, or you could try. All they can say is no. Yeah. The question is that if you would like a bigger bed, because you have a twin-size bed and you'd like to share a bed with your partner, do you go to your therapist or do you go to your psychologist because it's important for your mental health? I would say that you would want to go. It can be depending on who you're seeing. It could be a nurse, it could be a physical therapist, it could be an occupational therapist. So one of your care teams, like probably in the outpatient clinic, are going to be your best resource for submitting that because they're used to putting in requests for equipment. But I think definitely getting feedback and consideration from your psychologist is important. I think from an insurance standpoint, it is tricky. It has to be, the considerations or the criteria for the hospital beds are physical instead of mental health, which I don't agree with, but that may be a barrier. But if you initially had a hospital bed and your size has changed, that might be a way to get that covered. But I would definitely go to one of your care team members that helps with ordering equipment. Right. Right, which you don't want to do either. I know, and with bariatric, the criteria are it's by weight, and then it's also like for some folks if they're not as tall, so they don't meet the weight criteria. It's like a measurement across the chest. So I know it's a bummer, and then some insurances won't let you'd be like, okay, approve me for what I want, and then can I pay an upcharge? And depending on what your insurance is, that. And the vendor and availability, that could be an option, but you just have to talk to your team. Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. So the comment was that you're working on rolling and the twin bed is just too small. Exactly. That's the whole problem. You know what? I say try it. I mean, insurance doesn't know that it's important and medically necessary until we ask more often and advocate for that. So I think, like I said, it used to be that, insurances would only pay for a semi-electric bed, and some of them, if you ask and give reasons, the people that are reviewing it are approving a fully electric hospital bed. Now, that's private. Some private insurances, but unless we ask enough and say why it's important, then then everyone's going to say no. So yeah. Yes. So the question was, the thought is that Medicare pays for the equipment, and then the supplement would pay for the extra, and that's true. But they pay for what they cover, and Medicare has a certain payment amount, which unfortunately right now is lower than probably most other payers. So I believe right now what they're paying for is just a semi-electric hospital bed. But again, you may be able to, if you just have Medicare and if someone has Medicare and a supplement, you might be able to talk to the vendor and say, okay, this is what Medicare will pay for. Can I pay the upcharge? Well, my experience with most insurances right now, and as you know, most of our insurers for our patients at Harborview have Medicaid, and Medicaid will only pay for a semi-electric bed. So in talking about private insurance, I haven't, with our patients most recently that have had private insurance, I haven't been able to purchase a bed out of pocket. They do a rental to purchase, and so what you would be able to do an upcharge for is usually for a rental bed and upgrade from a semi-electric to a fully electric, or potentially ask if you could do a bariatric. I haven't done that lately. I haven't had any patients that met that, but that's kind of in my wheelhouse to do that. So it's not like I haven't come across any specialty bed. The vendors don't rent. They just have sort of a narrow window of semi-electric beds or fully electric beds that they rent. All right, so the question is, so a private insurance will let you pay extra for the monthly rental to get a better mattress or a fully electric bed, and yes, so they let you do an upcharge by month for that. And does Medicaid allow the same? No. Managed Medicaid is the same. Yeah, it's just like with wheelchairs and with everything else. And the reason for that with Medicaid is, people are applying for Medicaid. What they're saying is they are not financially able to pay for their insurance or their medical care, and so the vendors can't legally accept the money. It's not that they don't want to. They just can't legally accept payment for the upcharge of any sort of equipment from their clients that have Medicaid. That's complicated. So how is Medicare related to that? What I'm hearing from the vendors the last few years, Medicare has redone what their payment system is for all of their equipment, and that includes hospital beds, walkers, wheelchairs, and they have reduced the amount that they fund. And so with Medicare right now, the vendors are telling me they will do the rental, but actually if someone is going to need a bed, it's actually cheaper to just purchase it outright, because they get reimbursed so little that the Medicare beneficiary has a copay with it, that it's actually cheaper to just buy it outright. But if you don't want to do that and you want to just pay for it monthly, there are a few vendors that will do that, but not all of them. And most recently, I have one vendor that will not do any sort of fully electric beds, and then another one used to do it, but now they're having supply chain issues, and so can't really get hospital beds from them. All right. I guess we'll wrap it up.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for coming and participating with questions. It was great to have you.
Yeah, thank you.